Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
I get goosebumps when I hear this. We'll be playing a lot of this throughout the whole show.
Well, what you don't want to hear is you don't want to hear me start singing along with it.
Any version of that's good. Don't you worry.
Yeah, that's the U.S. Army song.
Yes, and it's a matter of fact, it's a combination of everybody there, so we'll just keep playing bits of it today on Veterans Day.
Awesome. Yeah, happy Veterans Day out there to all of our veterans. It's the 11th day of the 11th month, and in fact, the 101st anniversary of what would become known today as Veterans Day.
44th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War, too.
Ah, good little fact. And yesterday, I know, was the birthday of the U.S. Marine Corps.
How about that?
So,
Boy,
I mean, we
this
get
is
a lot.
big year.
This is a big day for us here.
Right.
So what a great day this is. And we want to thank all of our veterans out there who are listening, and even those who are not listening. We want to thank them for their service. When you really think about some of the things that these guys and gals have done.
Horrific things they had to go through back in those. And, you think about Pearl Harbor, and we brought this up on the Beyond the Law show. Pearl Harbor, Midway, the landing of the beach when these kids were 17, 18, 19 years old, running on the beach, and it's over for them, many of them.
Well, and, we don't hear a lot. We do hear a lot about World War II. That's very popular in the media. We've got a lot of movies about that.
Right.
One war that we don't hear a ton about, or maybe say as much about, is World War I.
Oh,
which
the
is
worst of all.
Yeah, the Great War.
Yes.
Which I don't know. I don't remember what the count was, but millions of men died, and just a horrible scenario with the trench warfare.
Right.
And sort of fighting forward 100 yards and falling back 100 yards and repeating that over and over.
Living in those trenches were filled with water for days on days, no food.
Right, and that's where the idea of trench foot comes from,
right.
Because your feet would actually start to rot in your boots from being soaked in the water. Oh,
right.
Just the conditions are hard to fathom.
Right.
Really hard to fathom. And, boy, we are so lucky today with all of the nice things that we have access to, all the comforts that we can easily access, things that just didn't exist back then.
I saw a meme today that said, if you really want to salute the veterans that fought and died for us, be nice to another human being.
There you go.
Because they fought for all of us.
Yeah, right.
So,
well, a lot there. I'll tell you, and when you think back, I mean, I was doing some of that this weekend because I actually went to the Grand Canyon this past weekend. And I had never been to the Grand Canyon.
Well, how deep was it?
Oh my goodness! I'm going to tell you what, the Grand Canyon. I had an idea in my mind of what it might look like, and I was not even close.
Really? I have that same idea, probably.
Not even close, Pat George. I mean, if you get, you really ought to go out there.
Did you get butterflies and you're looking down?
More than butterflies. I mean, it's just, you could sit there and look at the thing, in my opinion, all day long.
Wow.
There's so many different places to focus your eyes, and it is so much bigger than you could possibly imagine. I mean, it's so much bigger. I mean, I've seen big canyons and big gorges in my day. I've gone and looked at a few in different places, and not even close to
And what made that? Water cutting through all of that?
I mean, that's what they say over millions and millions of years. If you see the water, and I mean, you can barely see it most of the time. Most of the viewpoints, and I don't know what it looks like from the north rim because I was on the south rim of the canyon, but from the south rim, you basically see a big canyon, but there's another further canyon that you can't really see down into, and that's where the river is.
And the temperature is different down there at the very bottom.
Apparently at the bottom it's quite warm once
Right.
the sun comes out. I mean, at the top, you're up 5,000 or 6,000 feet, so you got 20 or so degrees Fahrenheit less than the surface temperature. So it's very tolerable up on the rim. But my understanding, I mean, one of the wardens was saying that if you got down into the bottom and the base of it, that it gets up in the summer to about 140 degrees. So it almost make you want to jump in the river. But I understand, of course, when you're up top and you look at the river, it all looks very kind of peaceful and navigable. But if you'd actually go down there, it's got quite a lot of force to it.
And did you go there just for that stop?
That stop, I went there. I was just knocking around doing some hiking, and so we had the option to kind of stay in Sedona, where we were hiking on
that's pretty nice.
Friday. Sedona's beautiful. I mean, beautiful. Never been to either place. In fact, never set foot in the state of Arizona until this past weekend. And but I'm glad we went to the canyon because that was just awe-inspiring. And we did a couple of neat hikes out there. Got some great vantage points. I mean, it's really good if you go out there to try to do a little bit of a hike out to the rim. Because if you just go to the main area, I mean, it's almost like Disney World there. I mean, there are just so many people at the visitor center. They've got these parking lots. They just filled up. We got there really early.
What did it cost to go?
Well, we had a national park pass, so nothing.
Okay.
So we got in with the park pass. So those are only $80 a year. So those, if you like to go to these big-time national parks, which are quite expensive to get into on a day-to-day basis, the normal car fee is $35, which is not terrible.
Still $35 to just drive through a park, but it's not just a park.
Yeah. But if you get the $80 pass, you can get into all the parks. And so particularly if you're going to go out west where there are some really, fantastic parks.
Hiking scares me very bad because of rattlesnakes. Did you see anything like that?
No, and I had my eyes peeled. I was looking for some snakes.
Right.
When I was in Santa Fe and hiking around Bandelier National Park, we got to see a western diamondback rattlesnake. Quite close to the trail, in fact, and he was pretty agitated.
Oh, boy.
And, of course, I've got my story from a few years ago where I got to meet an eastern diamondback rattlesnake up close and personal.
I don't remember that story.
I think I told you that story.
I don't remember that story.
Yeah. I was out knocking. This is close to home. This is in Brooksville type area.
Okay.
Out in the woods and ran into an eastern diamondback and didn't realize that I had crept up on it. Luckily, it was a pretty cold day, and so he was slow to react to me being there.
Good for you.
But I was standing there doing something, and as I was standing there, I heard a strange sound, and I just remember thinking, I wonder what kind of animal makes that sound. and then I looked down, and here is a pretty large eastern diamondback, and he was all coiled up, sitting with his head erect, like he was getting ready to...
This is a nightmare to me.
Oh, like he was getting ready to hit me on the leg, and he was literally about a foot away from me. So, I did a maneuver that I've never seen myself do
This
before.
is why I go to Epcot.
Where you can actually, all the snakes are friendly at Epcot,
yes,
right?
They're not going to get you. Right, and if they do come after you, they're not getting anywhere close. They're going to scare you for a second and bounce right back about 400 times a day.
Right. Well, okay, just to bounce back and speak just a little bit more about Veterans Day, it really began at the end of World War I, and basically, the Treaty of Versailles wasn't until June of 1919, the end of June. But there was an armistice or a cessation in hostilities. It isn't a true peace treaty, but it's just, okay, let's stop fighting for a while. And that happened on the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. So that's where we got the date for Veterans Day, actually. And that was enacted by the U.S. Congress on June 4th of 1926. And I had just a little bit here. I wanted to see if I could read you the resolution from the U.S. Congress. It says, whereas the 11th of November, 1918, marked the cessation of the most destructive, sanguinary, and far-reaching war in human annals, and the resumption by the people of the United States of peaceful relations with other nations, which we hope may never again be severed, and whereas it is fitting that the recurring anniversary of this date should be commemorated with thanksgiving and prayer and exercises designed to perpetuate peace through goodwill and mutual understanding between nations, and whereas the legislatures of 27 of our states have already declared November 11th to be a legal holiday, therefore be it resolved by the Senate, the House of Representatives concurring, that the President of the United States is requested to issue a proclamation calling upon the officials to display the flag of the United States on all government buildings on November 11th and inviting the people of the United States to observe this day in schools and churches or other suitable places with appropriate ceremonies of friendly relations with all other peoples. So that is the resolution that brought us the national recognition of Veterans Day, and we had a beautiful display this morning at the Sunshine Skyway you were showing me. I didn't get to see it. That must have been pretty early
Lit it
in
up
the
in
morning.
red, white, and blue.
But it looked gorgeous. And, of course, we have the president presiding over the Veterans Day Parade in New York City today.
First president ever.
Yeah. So, folks out there, happy Veterans Day. If you see a veteran today or any other day, be sure to thank them for their service to our country and to you. And we're gonna roll this song up just a little bit, turn it up, and ride this out through the break. So we'll see you on the other side of the break, folks.
Coast Guard.
That's great. Well, I tell you, we've got a lot of great Coast Guard members in this area, too. I know there's a Coast Guard station over there on Davis Islands. Used to run into them all the time.
I had a real good friend that worked with me at Q105. He was a sound guy. He actually went out and set up everything, and he didn't know what he was going to do back in the days at Q105, and he joined the Coast Guard, and he retired he was running all of St. Pete Clearwater.
Wow.
He retired as that.
Cool.
And it's just so funny that, here I am in radio still doing the same thing, and I've got all these guys that retired as lieutenant colonel generals. So,
the life that
fun.
could have been. The life that could have been, Pat
I've had a lot of fun in radio, and I don't think I was cut out to be a military guy. I would have been a buck private with my craziness.
I could definitely see that. Well, if you're missing Roxanne Wilder today, I understand she is on her way in. So she had a little something she had to take care of. So we're going to be joined by her hopefully in a little bit. And we do have a story that I in particular wanted to bring up and talk about when she gets here. So we'll save that for a little bit later. But, we just wanted to take just a quick look back at something. And that is, Chairman Lindsey Graham of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and we talked some about him before. I mean, that guy has really been a disappointment. I mean, he talks a good talk. He's one of the best talkers, frankly, on the Republican side of things. But if you just listen to what Lindsey Graham typically says, he's a very effective orator.
Morgan Streetman, we have a lot of those people on both sides.
I mean, don't we?
Yes.
I mean, it's like kind of reminiscent of, Trey Gowdy, although Congressman Gowdy, at least had hearings on things like Benghazi and appeared to try to do something. But it seems like a lot of these guys are just all talk. And I've seen a phrase that kind of works pretty well for what it seems like they're doing, and that is running out the clock. I mean, they give us a good talk, but then they have power. They do have some power. They could do some stuff, but they don't do anything. So they're all talk and no action. And Lindsey Graham is pretty much the same. He's already announced he's going to step down from his post as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, effective as of the end of the next presidential elections. That'd be January of 2021, when the next president actually comes into power, which I would assume, the way things are going for the Democrats, I would assume that's going to be President Trump again, unless they somehow are able to get him out through the impeachment process. But, we got a number of things we could talk about that Lindsey Graham has said recently. Again, he's a good talker. He says, look, if you don't reveal the identity of the whistleblower, and if the whistleblower doesn't testify. And by the way, I think we should stop probably calling this person a whistleblower, because that's really doing the person a favor. The person's really a leaker.
Right, a leaker.
And a spy.
Right.
I mean, that's what they were doing. They were in the administration as a spy, as part of John Brennan's Trump task force that we talked about last week, which we just found out about the fact that John Brennan had set up a task force within the CIA just to try to get President Trump. And he set it up during the Obama administration, so before Trump even came into office.
What about a leaker and a repeater of what they've been told to say?
I mean, it's just unbelievable. And we find out the guy worked with Adam Schiff ahead of time, so they coordinated their story. Maybe even he said, look, what do you need from me? Here's what I've got. Here's what we could use. How could you use this, Chairman Schiff? But let's flip back to Lindsey Graham, because he says he's got no power to do anything right now. But he actually does have a lot of power. He could hold some hearings. He could call some witnesses in before the Senate Judiciary Committee, just like the things that are going on in the House. Or
why doesn't he?
And why doesn't he, right? Because he talks a good talk, but he's come out and said he cannot do that. But that is not true. He's the chairman of the committee. And how come it is the Republicans who control the Senate aren't doing anything? They're not using any of their power to do anything. They could hold some hearings. They could call in, for instance, Hunter Biden and just ask Hunter Biden some questions about Burisma Holdings. And based on how Hunter Biden performed on the softball interview with Good Morning America, I'd say that might be a pretty good strategy to start to blow this thing apart because, I don't think he could stand up under that kind of scrutiny. I mean, he was having trouble with softball questions.
Maybe they need you as counsel.
Well, I think the point is there are plenty of people like me who can think like me, who are real people. Those people are not what they're looking for because those folks that are in Washington, D.C. are in it for themselves by and large. And that's pretty sad. And so Lindsey Graham is about protecting Lindsey Graham's power, Lindsey Graham's future. Lord knows what all kinds of relationships he's built with different groups and different people that he's more focused on than trying to do the right thing for the country and stop this impeachment nonsense that's going on in the House. And they could help to stop it by calling in some of these witnesses for live in-person questioning on television versus these secret proceedings that are going on in the House.
Are you saying they don't want to rock the boat?
I think they don't want to rock the boat. I think they don't particularly want to try to help President Trump. I think nobody in D.C., essentially nobody really likes President Trump. I think there's a few. I think Mark Meadows, Jim Jordan, I think a few others are legitimate supporters of President Trump. And you can kind of look at the vote on the resolution condemning his actions in Syria and see what Republicans voted for that to start to narrow down which ones are true supporters of the president. Because you see a lot of the Republicans voted I should say which ones voted against that, who voted on the side of the president in that resolution, because a lot of Republicans voted for that resolution. So that would start to help you narrow things down. But I guess I wouldn't even say I'm disappointed in Lindsey Graham because I kind of already knew that about him from years past. But it's just sad. It's just sad that he got that chairmanship. I think if Chuck Grassley was still chairman of the Judiciary Committee, which he's supposed to take back over in January of 2021, if everything continues as planned from Lindsey Graham, then I think maybe he would at least be trying to do something because, and by the way, I don't think Chuck Grassley was the most effective guy in the world, but at least he seemed to be fighting a little bit and trying to hold hearings on different issues. And for instance, he has written, letters to the Department of Justice asking about a lot of the issues that come up in the Strzok and Page text messages, including where they are referring to a person who they call Charlie, who is some kind of either confidential informant or counterintelligence plant within the Trump administration. And, of course, we wonder if Charlie isn't the whistleblower. And by the way, the name of the whistleblower has now been pretty well reported out there. One, it's been reported. I saw it on Fox News, the brave Molly Hemingway, who we always like to hear from Molly Hemingway because she's got some guts, She actually just spouted it off on the Howard Kurtz show, Media Blitz, on Fox News. She said that the alleged whistleblower was this guy named Eric Charamella. And, of course, that's where the nickname Charlie comes from, Charamella. So we think that's why he was being referred to as Charlie in the Strzok and Page text messages, which you can certainly go out there and find. But we also had Charamella's name put out there by Congressman Devin Nunes in a letter that he sent to Adam Schiff saying, hey, we've got a list of people that we want to testify. Because remember, Nancy Pelosi says they're going to be fair to the president in this whole situation. We're going to let the president call witnesses. We're going to let him cross-examine witnesses. This is going to be a fair process. And isn't that part of the way that our justice system works is the idea that you get to confront the witnesses against you?
Well, let's ask Roxanne because she has joined us.
Welcome, Roxanne.
I couldn't get out of the car, guys. I was listening to Morgan break it all down, and I'm like, this is compelling.
You know, a half hour of you is better than no hour.
Thank you. Right. I had a little update. I had to go do some blood pressure stuff. It is true. I listened to classical music on the way there. I had the best blood pressure readings I've had in a while. Then I listened to Morgan on the way back. So no one take my blood pressure right now because I'm fired up listening to all this.
I hope I didn't get you too fired up on this stuff.
Good stuff. But it's important. And I think it's just crazy that you have these other witnesses that would be defense witnesses, but they're not allowed to be called.
Yeah, I mean, shouldn't we? I mean, isn't the idea that you give the defendant a pretty broad, scope so that whatever might be brought forward as a defense, so we know that the trial is fair? So we know that you've had the opportunity, whatever your excuse or explanation or however you want to get to, at least in the criminal defense system, reasonable doubt, however you want to get there or try to get there, you're allowed to make that effort. And you can sort of put your best foot forward. And still, I'd say, and I should pull the statistics on that, but I bet you most people who are charged and tried wind up convicted. I mean, most juries don't think that we get all dressed up and go down there just for the sake of convicting an innocent person. I mean, the state wouldn't be doing that, right? And so most folks come in, and even though we're supposed to have innocent until proven guilty, I think most folks come in on juries, and they would make the assumption that the state is bringing legitimate charges that possibly should be, result in a conviction. So when we come back, we're going to run through some of the witnesses that the Republicans would like to call in this impeachment hearing.
Welcome back on this Veterans Day. So good to be a part of the Morgan Streetman Show. Roxanne Wilder here, and listening to some great music with Pat George. Thank you for
You're
this.
listening to the Air Force theme.
The Air Force theme.
You know I had to bring it back with that one.
Mm-hmm.
Close to your heart, Pat George. And Austin George.
And a big thank you to Austin today and every day.
I wonder if he's out there listening right now. I bet he's not. I bet he's out there doing push-ups.
No, you know what he's doing? He just made it back to Seattle.
Okay.
And he did his training in the woods for like 4 or 5 days, and he didn't get caught.
Good for him.
And if you get caught, you become a prisoner of war. Well, he didn't get caught, so now you got to go to a 4-hour class where you are a prisoner of war.
So now you get it anyway.
You get it anyway. So he has to do that on Wednesday. So.
But, I would have, if I was a betting man, I would have bet he wouldn't have gotten caught.
He didn't get caught.
He's an overperformer.
Well, it wasn't only him. He had a couple guys with him. So.
Oh, I'm sure. There's a lot of great guys out there. I mean, and of course, we've talked about what he does on the show before, and he's quite a high-level Special Forces operative. So I know you're a very proud papa.
I was very impressed when Roxanne got to see the Army Special Ops guy that was with you on the show the other day, and he found out what my son did. And he was a special ops guy, and he was really impressed. So that was very cool.
Yeah. There's a lot of respect there. And he made a great point. I just want to say this. I can't be said enough, especially on Veterans Day. They love it when you say thank you.
Yeah.
But you know what he said? The guest who we had last week, Blaine, he said, it's even more important to have a conversation, to extend that conversation, to have compassion for what we do, to find out what we did, what we've been through. So I thought that was pretty insightful.
Yeah, like, thank you. Sense. What do you do? What did you do? Or,
Yeah, right. Versus just thank you for your service.
Right.
But it is nice. I mean, particularly if you don't have a lot of time and you do see a veteran, it is nice to stop and thank them.
Always.
Yeah.
It goes a long way. So it's so nice that we have our veterans protecting our rights here, our right to vote. What a crazy election 2020 is going to be. Can you only imagine at this point? Oh, my goodness.
I can't.
Not as crazy, though, probably as what's happened with Evo Morales.
Well, there you go. We just wanted to bring you a quick bit of news because this is something you probably don't get a lot of information on other places unless you're watching a lot of media. But, Bolivia's been having some problems. They've been having quite a bit of protests over the last couple of weeks of their sitting president because there's some allegations that there were some real irregularities in the way the election was conducted. And, of course, Evo Morales, who was the former president at this point because he resigned yesterday, is, kind of one of these Chavistas. He's one of the group of socialist leaders that took over Central and South America at about the same time as Hugo Chavez. They were close with the Castros, close with the folks in Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega and others. And close with a lot of the groups down there, also Ecuador. they all sort of went with socialist governments, and Evo Morales was the one in Bolivia. So he's now resigned based on election irregularities. And, of course, what else would we expect from a socialist dictatorship? I mean, it's the same thing that went on in the Soviet Union. And for those folks that try to say, well, that's communism and we believe in socialism, I mean, you just don't really know your history, and you don't know what those words mean, because those are essentially the same thing. Now, maybe there's a little bit of difference, but in my opinion, it's a distinction without a difference. And so, here we've got news stories telling us that 7 in 10 millennials would vote for a socialist candidate.
Very scary.
And I'm just saying, you really don't know what you're saying when you say something like that, in my opinion. Because what you're signing up for is you're signing up for people like Evo Morales to be in charge. And then once they get power, you're not going to have free elections after that, or even anything close to free elections. And
you're not going to be able to say anything that you want to about those elections.
That's right. They had turned some of the security forces onto people who were protesting, who were complaining about the elections. People were attacked and other things by the security forces. And, of course, finally what happened yesterday and what caused Morales to resign was that the Army finally turned on him and said, no more, you need to step down. This is out of control. And, of course, the Army, the force, violence is their only way to hold on to power. So once they lose control over violence, in other words, we could turn the Army on the people. And, of course, the people in these countries, just like in all socialist countries, are disarmed. They are not well-armed people like we have here in the United States. And some people would say that's part of the reason for all the attacks on our Second Amendment, is if they could just get the guns out of Americans' hands, well, then the government can essentially do whatever it wants. It has free reign. And I know that's
Go ahead, finish that.
Well, I was just going to say, I know that's an uncomfortable conversation for a lot of people to think about, but that is the real basis for us having the Second Amendment, is protection from a tyrannical government.
All they got to do is call the cartel in Mexico, and they'll go down there and get him out immediately.
Exactly. Look at the Mexican cartel as a perfect example. When the people don't really have weapons, who takes over? The criminals and the criminal governments. So, wanted to jump up and just have a quick conversation about the Drudge Report, because that's something I've heard from a number of people that they have some, consternation about what's going on with the Drudge Report. And, of course, we've seen some of that. And, we've got a caller. So let's get our caller, Ed, on the line here. Hey, Ed, welcome to the Morgan Streetman Show.
Hey, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good
How
morning.
are you?
I'm well, thanks.
I'm
over in Tampa, but I had a question about why you think the impeachment hearings were secret for a while, and now apparently they're going public.
That's a good question.
That is a good question. Well, I think they were secret for a while because I think the truth is these witnesses that they're calling, the Democrats are calling, Adam Schiff and the Intelligence Committee, they're calling, won't stand up to cross-examination and won't stand up to scrutiny of their motives, their bias, how they came up with their testimony, etc. And that's why we're even seeing now Adam Schiff saying that the whistleblower, the so-called whistleblower, who's really just a leaker, and to use a colloquial use of the term, a spy inside the Trump administration, is not going to testify at all. And he says it's because of the president's threats. Well, that's just nonsense. You have the right to cross-examine, to confront the witnesses against you in this country. And the idea that the whistleblower would not even have to testify at this point, that we just take the whistleblower's second or third-hand hearsay on second or third-hand hearsay from Adam Schiff, I mean, that's just absolutely insane, and it's completely turned the idea of our justice system on its head. So why did they have it secret for a while? I think it's because the witnesses cannot stand up to scrutiny and cannot stand up to cross-examination, and they did not want those witnesses to be cross-examined. Now, it's very interesting that they're finally having to go public with it, and that starts, my understanding is, if everything goes as planned, that starts this Wednesday. But I don't think this impeachment process has a hope of succeeding in the minds of the American people, because once they start hearing some of the details, And, of course, you look at the list of witnesses, which we promised folks we were going to run through, and I'll just run through some of them here. But you look at the list of witnesses that Devin Nunes has put forward that they want to call on the Republican side, and it's Devin Archer, who is a board member of Burisma and the business partner of Hunter Biden. They want to call Hunter Biden. They want to call that Ukrainian DNC staffer, Alexandra Chalupa. And if you've gotten the opportunity to watch that Glenn Beck video on the chalkboard and the whole Ukrainian thing, that you know a lot about Alexandra Chalupa and her involvement in setting a lot of this up. They want to call David Hale, Nellie Orr. There's a name we haven't heard in a while. Ambassador Volker. And perhaps most importantly, they want to call the alleged whistleblower as a witness. And, of course, we know from many different sources now, including Fox News, including Devin Nunes, the ranking member, that the whistleblower is alleged to be Eric Ciaramella, who was actually sat as on the National Security Council as an advisor. He's a very young guy. He's in his early 30s and is a CIA guy. But he actually sat on that, and then he was removed from the National Security Council for leaking. But then H.R. McMaster, who was no fan of President Trump, and you got to wonder sometimes why President Trump just surrounds himself with his enemies. It's almost Lincoln-esque, with his group of rivals that Lincoln brought into his cabinet. But I think that's really done President Trump a bit of a disservice in trying to bring these people in. I think in his mind, he'd bring them in and perhaps turn them a little bit, turn them to his side of things, just through his force of personality, which he's used to being able to turn people to his side. Mm-hmm. Exactly. But, of course, that didn't happen because these people are not really open to persuasion. They come in with an agenda. And so H.R. McMaster brought this guy, who has been widely reported now is the alleged whistleblower, brought this guy back into the administration. And, of course, now it's interesting because the whistleblower didn't even have the right to access the transcript of the call that he filed his whistleblower complaint about. So he was revealing things that he was not even supposed to be accessing, but somehow, some way, he got access to them. And I think some of those kind of questions would be very interesting to have answered. And in particular, we'd like to know what was the relationship between this person and Adam Schiff ahead of time, because there was some relationship there. Now, Schiff lied about that originally. He said there wasn't contact with the whistleblower and, gave a lot of indications that his office had not had any contact. Well, it's now come out that before the complaint was even filed, his office was working with the alleged whistleblower and even recommended attorneys for the alleged whistleblower. And that, when you look into some of these attorneys that the whistleblower got, in particular Mark Zaid, that's another area I think that really deserves some questioning because, Mark Zaid's made some tweets about this situation. Now, not exactly, but he tweeted back in 2017 about the resistance and the beginning of a coup against the president. To me, that's a bombshell. Mm-hmm. The fact that the attorney for the whistleblower was talking in 2017 about having a coup against the president. And now, what do we see playing out before us? Now, it's not a coup in the sense of, maybe the Bolivian coup where the army says, listen, Mr. President, you need to step down, and doesn't really have to say or else, but, that's in there, that's implied, or else we may step in and take you out. But this is more of a paper coup where, we're going to get the president no matter what. We're going to go with Russia and we're going to go with Bob Mueller, and if that fizzles out like it did, which I don't think they expected, then we're going to come up with something else. So let's now come up with the Ukraine gate, this whole Ukraine situation. So, Ed, thanks for the call. I think the long and short of it is that these witnesses and their attorneys and their biases and their motives will not stand up to scrutiny at the end of the day, particularly in the minds of the American people.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for calling. All right, well, we're going to go out there when we come back. Got a few other things to tell you about just before we go out there, but we've got some great out there segment that's going to tie right in with everything we've been talking about today. Stick around.
To the shores
back on the Morgan Streetman Show. Thank you, Pat George, for all of this Veterans Day themed music.
Jump in there and sing.
I would never do that to you, gentlemen, or our listeners. Would not want to hurt your ears on this lovely Monday. And we are, well, something that hurts our ears is the whistleblower.
Yeah, well,
That's
you know
an
from
annoying
experience that I will jump in there and start singing.
And that's fine.
That's a dangerous thing, Pat George, particularly with these military hymns, which I love. I used to listen to those when I would run. Of course, that was many years ago. Morgan was running, but that was
It keeps you running.
It does keep you running. That's right. Gets you fired up. Well, I just want to mention a couple of other things. You got to go out there. We just don't have time on this show. I wish we had 3 hours every day because then we could really cover some of these stories that deserve maybe an hour even of time just to try to unpack everything and talk about everything. But you got to go out there and look at some of these tweets by the attorney for the alleged whistleblower. The attorney's name is Mark Zaid, and the tweets are still up as of this morning. And I've been wondering when this guy's going to delete some of these tweets. Because one, you've got the coup tweet talking about the coup against President Trump, and I think that one's just a bombshell tweet coming from this guy. By the way, a buddy of Adam Schiff's. But then you've also got some other really kind of strange tweets that you could dive into. I won't get into too much detail, but he talks about love of Disney and particularly love of some of the Disney girls and things. I mean, it goes to a place that's just a little strange, I think, for a grown man. Mm-hmm. Everybody's entitled to their own interests to a degree. At some point, things become criminal. But he's also got a tweet out there in 10th of February of 2018 that you could still find as of right now where he's bragging about getting security clearances, quote, for guys with child porn issues. So I just thought that was,
that.
It never ends.
It never ends, does it? If there's one group of people, that I personally wouldn't help in any context, no offense, it's people who have child porn issues.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say, look, find another lawyer. Now, every lawyer's entitled to represent clients, and everybody is entitled to legal representation. So I want to be careful not to go too far with that. But it's just a strange fellow who would brag about that on Twitter, in my opinion.
And that's somewhat of a euphemism, isn't it?
Well, it does make one wonder, particularly when you look at some of the strangeness that he posts about the Disney movies. All right, well, we wanted to cover, we're not going to have a great amount of time for a wonderful out there story, but we wanted to cover a couple of other stories real quickly. First of all, Nikki Haley, has come out with a book this week, With All Due Respect. Interesting title, right? And particularly in this climate. And in this book, she reveals, apparently for the first time ever, she says that John Kelly and Rex Tillerson tried to enlist her in a scheme to undermine the president. Now, I personally don't know how far you can actually trust Nikki Haley based on some of her actions in the past. And I just wanted to point this out to you folks. This is the first time she's mentioning that ever. So that means she didn't go and tell the president when they approached her, hey, a couple of members, your chief of staff and a member of your cabinet and maybe others are actively recruiting other cabinet members, other members of the administration to try to undermine your administration. She didn't go and tell the president that. So where does her loyalty really lie? And I would love to hear from John Kelly and Rex Tillerson because, they might actually indicate that she wasn't as against the idea as she wants to portray now.
Her loyalty lies in trying to sell a book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and or promote herself,
Right.
Just like we were talking earlier. And that's the problem with these Washington politicians is they're really all in it for themselves. It's really sad. Now, before we jump into our out there, we really got to do this quick. We really don't have time for this, but I want to just throw out there something, Roxanne, you and I have been talking about off air for a couple of weeks, and it actually broke through on Fox News recently, and that is what's up with the Drudge Report.
I remember when my father first told me about the Drudge Report years and years ago. I'm talking like 2013-ish. Mm-hmm. And he said, it feels like it's news that's just straightforward. Mm-hmm. It's not one side or the other. And you felt that way for a long time with Drudge, but now it's turned into a bit of a Trump bashing site.
Well, you remember Matt Drudge was the one who broke the Monica Lewinsky story way back when other mainstream news would not report on it.
Stayed away from it.
And that's how he got made. And, of course, he's gone through some different changes through the years in terms of personnel who've helped him out. In fact, he got Andrew Breitbart started, and that led to the founding of the Breitbart News Organization, and it wasn't back then what it is today. So there's a lot of interesting history there that we'd love to get a chance to talk about. But if you're a regular consumer of the Drudge Report, and most of us who are into the news check it a couple of times a day. I know I used to check it almost, I would almost be compulsive about checking the Drudge Report because he's so good at staying on top of things. Mm-hmm. But I have to tell you, lately I've been going a couple of days in between. I still check it, but it's only every few days because he seems to be featuring so much anti-Trump stories and particularly stuff about impeachment. It almost seems like he's in favor of impeachment. And, of course, there's no point on the site where Drudge comes out and says, this is what I think, or this is
my opinion.
Right. So as we were discussing, maybe he's sharing those stories because he's trying to get the base fired. I mean, we just don't know why he's doing it. But if you're a regular reader of the Drudge Report, I would say in the last several months, maybe 2 or 3 months, you've noticed a big change in the way that Matt Drudge is reporting on the news.
Like Fox News, too.
Fox News is a clear one, so we'd love to get into that some more. But let's try to flip into our Out There in the minute and a half that we have left for it. And what I want to talk about is what kind of a world are we living in? Honestly, it feels like if you've read the book 1984 by George Orwell, it's beginning to feel like 1984 because of the way the media treats us, the public. They treat us, number one, like we're exceptionally stupid. They think that you and I are very, very stupid because of the kind of shenanigans they try to pull. And just a couple that came to mind is, look at the difference between the way they treated the Jeffrey Epstein story. And I mean, there's so many different things they could go into on the Epstein story, including his associates and everything else. But remember, Amy Robach of ABC was caught talking about how ABC wouldn't run with the story, even though they had interviews, they had photographs, they had a lot of documentary evidence on what was going on with Epstein and his pals and these young girls. And ABC said, well, that's not sufficiently documented to run with. Well, how about Harvey Weinstein? How many years did NBC keep that a secret? Ronan Farrow's come out and talked about the catch and kill from NBC on that. So you've got that on the one hand, but now on the other hand, you've got the allegations last year against Brett Kavanaugh, which were totally unsubstantiated, which totally fell apart, but every single news organization ran with them. How about the big one? How about the Trump-Russia collusion hoax? It went on for 3 years. The news organizations acted like that was documented fact. They had on guest after guest, John Brennan, saying the president's about to be indicted next week. False. Saying there was Adam Schiff saying there was proof. He'd seen the proof of the conspiracy of the collusion. That also was false. And now we've got the Trump-Ukraine story that they're also pushing on us. So what kind of a world do we live in with our media today? It's a good question. Folks, I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.